Okay, welcome everyone on the call. Welcome to the QuakeCoRE seminar series, and this week's speaker is Wendy Saunders. Wendy is a long-time colleague of mine. Many of you know her from her land use planning work, but I've been told to officially announce, as it has come out, that Wendy is joining the leadership team for QuakeCoRE. So we congratulate her on that, and we welcome her to this talk today, and I will let Wendy introduce more about herself and the talk as she sees fit. So welcome, Wendy.
Thanks, David. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, everybody. As David said, I'm Wendy Saunders, based at GNS Science, where I do all sorts of all hazard approach to natural hazards. So I've worked on It's Our Fault previously. And joining me today is Lucy Carter, who is our Māori social scientist here at GNS, and she has joined this project where we've been looking at the role of iwi management plans in natural hazard research. So I'll just get our presentation up. Okay, so can everyone see that screen that's coming up? Oops.
Yep, very good from my end. I'm sure everyone else can.
Great. Can you see us as well, or just the screen?
We can see you both and the screen. So the screen's on, the little small screen with you on, and then the presentation on the big screen.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so yeah, so today this is a really interesting area because it has implications for us as researchers, as well as iwi and councils that we might be dealing with when it comes to their decision making. So just a bit about this project. It's funded through the Resilience to Nature's Challenges Science Challenge through the Mataranga Māori program. And with some co-funding as well from the governance program as part of that challenge. And it really came up, I was involved heavily in the review of the Christchurch district plan post the earthquakes and represented the Crown, so attended a lot of hearings over 18 months. And the role of iwi management plans came up quite a bit in the hearings, and one particular day, one of the commissioners was asking a planner if they had looked at the iwi management plan, and they responded no, they hadn't. And then asked, you know, hearing what you've heard today, do you think that you should have looked at the iwi management plan? And they said no, they didn't see the reason to. And then gave them another lifeline and said, you know, looking back, if you were to do this again, you know, would you look at the iwi management plan? And they still said no. So I got really interested in iwi management plans and their role, because they are actually legislative documents under the Resource Management Act. And while they sit within the Resource Management Act, they also have implications across a number of other areas as well, such as emergency management, and also for us as researchers. They're very good if you're going into a geographical area to do some research. They provide a really good context for the cultural values and understanding that iwi of that area have. And so if you're going to be wanting to engage with iwi, they're a really good first step for seeing what their context is for the environment that you'll be working in. They're very well structured documents. There's the first generation of the documents that came out maybe sort of 15 or 20 years ago were quite aspirational, but now they're being written by planners, so they're very much structured around council plans and council requirements, and they're very good at outlining the priorities that they have. So it could be to do with a whole lot of things like water quality or air quality or biodiversity. So whatever their priorities are, they are listed in those plans. They also include or a lot of them do. So there's no set structure for these iwi management plans, but a lot of them set out how to engage with iwi, which again, for us as researchers can be really valuable. The engagement that's set out in the plans is sort of predominantly for people who are going for consent applications with councils and need to engage with iwi as affected parties, but also it provides, with our researcher hat on, it does provide a good way of knowing how they would like to be engaged with. Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Do you put in an expression of interest through their website? It's a really good way of understanding, okay, how do we make that first point of contact about our research? So go and have a look at these plans for that. They provide a really good opportunity for including information on natural hazards. As far as the management options go, the action points that they may have come up with themselves for reducing risks that they want to see, and as I said, the engagement processes for working with them, and mitigation measures. So I'll go into a case study of that. So what we did with this research is I started it with a bit of a hiss and a roar, and soon worked out that it was actually a lot bigger than what I thought it was going to be. So I've structured it into 4 key stages. So the first stage was just understanding the context of these plans, and that is, what is the legislative framework? What are the requirements under the Resource Management Act for these plans? How do the governance arrangements work with these? What's the expectations around engagement, and how is knowledge sort of shared in these plans? So a report has been written, and I've got some references coming up, which kind of provides some of that context. The second stage was looking at a case study in the Bay of Plenty around the plans, and the Bay was chosen because they have every single hazard that we have in New Zealand. They have it right there, so they're pretty fortunate in a way as far as that goes. They also have a lot of iwi management plans, so it was good to be able to analyse those plans, see how many actually included natural hazards, and if they did include them, how did they acknowledge them, and sort of start to look at some of the opportunities and challenges. So those first 2 stages were pretty much desktop research into the plans. So stage 3, which we've started on, is really verifying the desktop research that we've done. And we're going and having hui with the iwi who do have natural hazards in their plans. Also talking to councils about how they use the plans and implement them. And that's across council, not just the planners, but also the emergency management officers and other council staff. Us as researchers, how do we interact with plans? And then we'll have a stage 4, which kind of summarises it all and puts it into the some sort of theoretical context, both from a Māori worldview as also from a Western worldview. So, as I mentioned, the first stage is really around sort of setting the scene, the legislative framework. And what you can see here is the diagram on the left, sort of showing the hierarchy of policies and plans under the Resource Management Act, and where iwi management plans have an influence. So right from the regional policy statements, right down to non-statutory planning tools, they have a huge influence over all those plans that councils have. And the other side, on the right hand side, it just shows how iwi, where they see their plans as well, fitting into all the different documents. So here's one from Tauranga showing links, you know, and influences to the regional policy statement and the district plans, other plans. So similar understanding as to the legislative context. As I said, we looked at the Bay of Plenty as a case study because of the amount of hazards and plans that they have. So we were really interested to see how the plans included natural hazards, considering this is a really focal point for hazards in New Zealand. I was kind of expecting that the plans might reflect that as well. And was also interested to see how the councils recognised the IMPs in their plans. So out of all the plans that were available, 21 were assessed. Because while there were more plans than that, not many or not all of them were actually accessible. So these were just the ones that were accessible through the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website. So we've made a number of key findings in the report, but these are just some of the more interesting ones. You can see the natural hazards that were assessed, that the plans were assessed against. So, you know, flood, earthquake, climate change, erosion, tsunami, sea level rise, coastal drought, and other. Now, you'll see that there's some overlap there between climate change and sea level rise, for instance, and drought. But that was just how they were represented in the plans. So that's why we've got those categories there. And it was really interesting that while 81% of the rohis for the plans had coastlines, only 10% of these addressed sea level rise or tsunami. And what else can be seen is that natural hazards are really underrepresented in the plans, and which really poses the question as to why. Why aren't hazards more represented in these plans, considering the amount of hazards and the history of events in the Bay? So when you're looking at the plans, they refer to district plans quite a lot. 81% of the plans that we analysed included reference to district plans. And then down from there, all sorts of other planning documents, regional plans, regional policy statements. Interestingly, only sort of one sedum group plan is mentioned. So there's some issues there around referring to other policies and plans. So once we did that initial sort of content analysis of the plans, looked at 4 of them in more detail around how they had included natural hazards and climate change into the iwi management plan, and really looked at the relationship to other plans as far as exactly how they were referred to. Looked at the consultation and engagement setting as far as, you know, the criteria or the requirements around engagement and consultation, and looked a little bit further into how IMPs were recognised in council plans, including civil defence emergency management plans. So some of the key findings of stage 2 was that the IMPs are written in a way to make them very usable for councils. So as I said, the first round of plans that were developed were quite aspirational, and there was nothing that councils could really sort of copy and paste into their own decision making that goes on, because they were quite aspirational. But the plans that have been developed recently are quite specific. They have issues, objectives, policies, and methods. Some IMPs included hazards, but most don't. And so that's really made us ask some questions around why is that? Is it the availability of hazard information? You know, how is that sharing of information happening between councils or between us as researchers? How are we directly sharing our results and research with iwi? Or is it competing priorities? For a lot of iwi, water quality is a real key priority, and they're putting all their resource into addressing water quality. And so is it a resourcing sort of prioritisation issue? And what was really interesting was the lack of acknowledgement around climate change, particularly interesting in the Tauranga Moana plan, which you can see the cover of there, which was done with 3 iwi around the Tauranga Harbour. And climate change isn't even included in the plan, or sea level rise, and yet they have a lot of land that will be affected by sea level rise. So why is that? Why aren't they addressing it? So these have been some of the questions that have come out of that stage 2 report, and there's a reference there for it. What we also found in these plans is that when we were going through them, there's some real cries for help. And for us as researchers, it's really important that if we can understand these cries for help, then we can help, it can help inform our own research going forward, particularly when we're writing proposals or gaps. If you look at a plan and there's absolutely nothing on active faults, for instance, even though it's an issue in an area, then you can help, you could align your research to that gap and help address that gap in that plan. So the plans can be useful for us as researchers as far as we can help them or contribute to their understanding if there is a cry for help in there, or to help address the gap. So for instance, Matakana Island in the Tauranga Harbour, in their plan, it says that they urgently need an effective warning system for the islands. Now, when we have gone and, or I've mentioned this to some of the council staff, they had no idea that this was in the plan. And they said, oh, we've got funding for that in the LTP to go and do some more, tsunami mapping for the harbour. But no one's actually told the iwi that, or got them involved in that conversation. In the Ngāti Rākawa plan, there's some other real clear indicators around the understanding that they have. We're not well informed about the challenges posed in the event of a natural disaster. We do not have comprehensive response plans in place to be able to respond to natural disasters. We're unsure of natural hazards planning by local authorities and government agencies, and we're unclear as to the role they play amongst the Waikato Regional Local Government Nexus in times of disasters. So there's some real clear sort of action points that we could help address with some of these plans. I'll pass you over to Lucy now, who can talk about the stage 3 of the study.
So we circulated the stage 2 report with the iwi, hapu and councils that were featured in the report to solicit feedback and to invite them to participate in a series of hui to verify the findings of the stage 2 report. And in May, our research team conducted these hui with participants in the Bay of Plenty. This included iwi and hapu such as Ngāti Rangawewahi, Ngāti Rangatihi, and the Rangiwaia and Matakana Island hapu. And we also conducted hui with several of the councils, including the Rotorua District Council, Western Bay of Plenty District Council, and Tauranga City Council. And we're planning a second visit to the Bay of Plenty later this year to meet with iwi, hapu, and councils in the Eastern Bay of Plenty region. So basically, we had a series of key questions that we asked, which were the same for both iwi and hapu as well as the council. And these were, do you use the iwi management plans? Are iwi management plans useful and used? And what are the challenges and opportunities for their use? So we had some very interesting preliminary findings from our research. So firstly, the importance of iwi management plans to iwi and hapu became abundantly clear, with multiple participants referring to these plans as their Bibles. This was regardless of whether the participant was a primary writer or more of an implementer of the plan. The value that they placed on these documents was very clear. Another important finding was the mixed awareness that councils had of iwi management plans. So some were extremely familiar with the plans and passionate about ensuring their staff were aware and actively using the plans in decision making. And other councils were less familiar with the plans. And although they recognised the potential value of iwi management plans, they did not refer to them often in decision making, and staff had low awareness of the plans. It was also clear through discussions that a collective understanding and use of these plans from iwi, council and knowledge providers has significant potential to contribute to the hazard management of the region. So one participant from a hapu we were interviewing expressed that his community are actively seeking information on hazards and hazard management and would like to work with knowledge providers and councils on developing a plan. Additionally, the McDem Ministerial Review that was published in January this year was specifically discussed the importance of having closer relationships with iwi. So there's potential here for iwi management plans to be used as a means of forming closer relationships between civil defence and iwi and hapu, and research and knowledge providers to work together to build comprehensive hazard management plans for more resilient communities. So for recommendations, we've got a series of recommendations that we've put together for the Ministry, for the Environment and McDem, for councils and for research providers. So one is that guidance from MFE should be provided on how to apply IMPs effectively so that there is consistency in how these are applied and an expectation of knowledge on these plans. Additionally, we recommend that emergency management officers employ Māori staff to work with the communities to understand their needs. Marae increasingly being considered as partners in response, but it would be really good to see more inclusion of iwi and hapu in all emergency planning processes. Another recommendation is that iwi management plans should be included in Making Good Decisions, which is the New Zealand Planning Institute program for commissioners. In terms of councils, we recommend that iwi management plans are part of new staff orientation at councils. So this has already been instituted by some councils, but it would be good to see it instituted across all councils. We also see an opportunity for regional councils to facilitate discussions and provide expert advice during the development of IMPs, which is not a suggestion that regional councils take over the plan development process, so to speak, but it would be able to ensure that plans can address all relevant issues to councils in regards to natural hazards or other issues, and there's just more discussion around this. Another recommendation is that councils provide a hot desk for iwi in council to develop and implement IMPs, which will create better visibility internally and may foster a more collaborative environment for the plans. A final recommendation for councils is that they undertake a dye test to see how an IMP influences and informs a decision from the start of a process, such as within policy development and consent applications all the way through. And we finally have a few recommendations for research and knowledge providers based on our findings so far, which is that research organisations should consider IMPs when writing Vision Motoranga policy and strategy. There's a lot of clear information within these documents on consultation and about Te Ao Māori that can help inform the context of policy and strategy. Secondly, research officers should have an awareness of IMPs, at least to the extent that they can direct researchers to where they can find these documents to read before they put together a funding bid for a project. And finally, for researchers, we have a simple recommendation, which is to read an iwi management plan, whether it's your local iwi's plan or one from an iwi in a different rohe where you're conducting research. So how can IMPs help you as researchers? Simply, these IMPs will give you an understanding of their issues, priorities, and gaps. You can use these to inform your research direction. What gaps are you addressing? What issue will your research contribute to for the iwi? And how can your research help iwi with their priorities? What's their process for engagement? They are also very useful for providing the cultural context for your place of research. If you show up to a hui and you already know what the iwi's history and connection to the whenua and moana is, and what is valued by the iwi, it's a sign that your engagement isn't just a token act and that you're taking their priorities seriously. So the key messages to take away: iwis are a valuable hazard management tool for iwis, councils and researchers. Check out the IMPs in your area of focus. If there isn't any hazard information, why is this? What needs do the iwi and hapu have? And IMPs are a great and easy first assessment of iwi priorities, needs and gaps that you can use to inform your research direction. Wendy, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's about it. The research is ongoing. Feel free to contact either of us if you'd like to discuss it further. I feel like we're kind of becoming, connectors with this research as well. Just making sure that people are connecting across councils and iwis and you know, as researchers as well. But I do put out a challenge to you, like what Lucy said, you know, go and check out a plan and see what's in there, because they are incredibly valuable from a researcher perspective, as well as for iwi's own management and mataranga, and for councils as well. So we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Wendy, it's Erica Seville here. Great presentation, Wendy and Lucy. Just a quick question. You may have covered it earlier. I joined about 5 minutes late. where can you actually find many of these iwi management plans? Are they available publicly on websites? Like, can you just Google find them, or?
Yeah, it depends where they are. Some of the regional councils have them on their websites. One of the recommendations that we'll be making is that all councils put them on their websites to make them more accessible. Otherwise, if you're going to doing work in a specific geographical sort of location, just check out the local iwi website. They should be there. Now, not all iwi have them, and so they're not mandatory documents, but once they are submitted to a council, they become legislative documents. So iwi aren't required to do them, but if they do them and submit them to council, then they are legislative. So in some places, like in Wellington, for instance, there aren't any iwi management plans. So you just have to kind of have a look and see what you can find.
Awesome, thank you.
Wendy, sorry, Wendy and Lucy, it's Matthew Hughes here at the University of Canterbury. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a couple of questions. So who in the iwi actually puts these documents together? Are these just volunteers within the runanga? Are they people with training or degrees in various fields of policies and planning? So what is the level of expertise that goes into these documents?
Yeah, that's a great question, because increasingly they're actually being written by planners, and these can either be within the Māori Trust themselves, or they get contractors in to help them do that. It depends on, some regional councils help to fund the development of iwi management plans. So where funding is available, I think that helps as to who can help with it. Also, where iwi are in the settlement process makes a bit of a difference as well. So those who are post-settlement tend to have more comprehensive plans, and those that are yet to settle, their priorities are to settle, not to write a good iwi management plan.
It's a really good point, and obviously here in Canterbury, Ngāi Tahu are fairly well advanced, so I need to take a look at the various plans they've got. Thanks for that. The final. Sorry. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, interestingly, looking at Canterbury and particularly QuakeCoRE, because we're doing some work in QuakeCoRE. This is the QuakeCoRE Environmental Management Plan, all 300 and something or other pages, 322 pages, and it doesn't mention active faults.
Okay, well, maybe we can do something about that.
Yeah,
and the final question is, considering the coastal rohe in your study area and the conversations you had, did you get any insight as to the neglect of sea level rise and tsunami hazards?
Yeah, I think the ones that we've been looking at, because we're trying to do this in a positive light, to say here's some examples of how iwi have done a really good job at incorporating hazards and climate change, and some have done like chapters on climate change. But it will be interesting as well. I'm keen to go and ask some of the ones who haven't, why not, without trying to be put in an awkward position about, we don't want to name and shame or anything. But from looking at those plans, it just seems that their priorities are in different areas, such as water quality. And it came through quite strongly with some of them. And I think that some look at the whole environment. Others, from some of the sort of anecdotal conversations that I've had with people, they'll pick off kind of an issue and have a plan that addresses that, and then they'll review the plan and maybe start looking at another issue. But I think it comes down to prioritizing their values and the need, and also resourcing.
Great, thank you very much.
Any further questions for Wendy? Just pipe up and we'll moderate if there's too many people talking.
Hi, David. This is Nirmal here. Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Wendy, Lucy. A very good presentation. So this is the first time I'm coming to this QuakeCoRE meeting. So I had one question about your engagement as researchers with the WHOIs, which you did. And I'm just curious, if you could just share your experiences there, what to do and what not to do. And, you have had quite a few WHOIs there. So just curious as a researcher to know how that plan went. And because you were going with, my understanding is you went with trying to understand why hazards and, these events are not factored. But you kind of indicated that in the WHOIs where you went, the people there were more passionate about water quality, for instance. So how did you navigate that? And just some tidbits for do's and don'ts, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we arranged the WHOI through, we're fortunate at GNS in that we have a Māori staff member whose role is to help support staff. And so we got her involved very early on in the planning of the WHOI, and so that she could do a lot of the introductions through email and with follow-up phone conversations to make sure that they were culturally, what's the word? Yeah, culturally appropriate. Plus she has a lot of local knowledge and knows everyone. We're as connected to everyone. And so we were fortunate in that we had her, Diane, and she came with us as well. So not only did she help us organise the WHOI, but she came with us and she was funded. I funded her through the program to do that. And I think that's really important, is to provide funding for that cultural support that we need. You just can't assume that someone should give it to you. And so we funded her to come along with us. And so she made sure we didn't meet on marae, so it wasn't formal marae settings. It was more the Runanga office, for instance. We started off in a garden shed, having a cup of tea and some morning tea. But just making sure that regardless of where we had the WHOI, whether if it was in an office, in a garden shed, or in a cafe, that still appropriate cultural protocols were still undertaken. And so that would be my number one recommendation, is to have someone funded on your project to take you through that. So that if we did put a foot out of place, which happens, you've got someone there who can help you out with that.
I would also add that we came prepared to be flexible. So, we were prepared to bring food to WHOI. We had koha prepared in the form of some informational books on hazards. So it's really, you don't really know necessarily who's going to be there on the day. So it's good to be able to be prepared to be flexible about sort of what you're providing in terms of protocol.
And it's also being clear about, you want information from them, so what are you going to give back to them that's useful? And so we tried to take as many sort of resources or links to resources that we could leave with them, so that they did have something as well. And follow up is important. Don't just get the information and then it stops there. So Diane, who was with us as our sort of cultural advisor, she sent a follow-up email. I've since followed up with them as well with some additional information and an update on where the project's at and what we're intending to do in the future. And so it's just keeping that conversation continuing as well.
Thank you very much.
David, can I ask a question? Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Wendy and Lucy. It's John Hopkins at Canterbury here. Thank you very much for your talk. I had no idea about the research you were doing, so it's and it actually relates to stuff that I'm doing, so that's worthwhile in itself. I've just supervised an LLM student. He's just finishing, looking at Maori governance. I've done a bit in that field around environmental management generally, not specifically hazards. And he's talked about this, and I have to say, so I thought there was might maybe comment on his thoughts. His views were that one of the problems with these plans is they're basically not used by councils, which seems to be, I think, what you're hinting at. And he was quite damning, not just it should be of these, but other aspects, that a lot of window dressing around Maori involvement. And when you test it against the standards of Indigenous governance, it doesn't come out very highly. So that was one comment. Maybe you could comment on that. And the other, actually, I forgot what my other question was. So just stick with that one.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely found that. I mean, these, I kind of have become a bit of an advocate, and that's what I meant by connected, to try and get people to look at it. One of the issues that's come up is actually how there needs to be now a next step is how do we implement these plans?
Yep.
Like, I think some councils struggle with that. We talked to councils who, excuse me, hadn't even looked at the plans. So one extreme end, didn't know anything about them, hadn't looked at them, didn't know what was in them, versus other councils who fully know what's in them, want to implement them more. We've actually been invited to one council has staff training on IMPs. So we're attending the council training in August around the whole IMPs to see what does that training involve for council staff, to make them aware of the plans and how they can use them. But that's something that we need to flesh out some more when we go and interview some more of the councils, because we're only halfway through with the councils. But it seems as well that sometimes there's a lot of fanfare when they're lodged with councils. You know, there's a really nice ceremony and shaking of hands and photographs, and there's quite a formal sort of framework that councils have for how the plans are to be submitted. But then that's it. That kind of, with some councils, it stops at that. There's nothing else going through. So part of this project is really raising that awareness to go and talk to people. You know, we presented at the McDem conference on this, and I've got some good follow-ups from that and MFE. But no, you're completely right. It is varied. To me, they hold huge potential and value. We just have to make, or councils have to just realise the value and potential that they hold.
That's maybe we could talk separately offline about, because it'd be quite good to connect. He had some quite significant thoughts on this. The other issue, though, is in the other side of it, where you mentioned that some iwi are now more engaged with council structure in a particular way, because these are, as you say, Resource Management Act documents. But there comes the problem. One of the problems has been that, or the allegation is that then what happens is iwi views are somewhat Europeanized or Western. It's not really what the iwi want to talk about, because they fit it within the framework of because otherwise there's no point. So I don't know if that's something you came across or.
Yeah, it was a couple of the ones we've talked to. They really highly value their plans, so that didn't come across at all. And they're actually using the plans, yes, for a council purpose, but also to help ground their own hapu and iwi, so that they have common values and priorities that they can together work towards. So that's why, on separate occasions, the iwi themselves referred to the plans as their Bible. It's given them, kind of a central document for them to focus and prioritise and have some commonality around their mātauranga or the changing mātauranga that they may be having as well, and how to transition that changing mātauranga into practice. So yeah, it's an interesting one, that.
So you didn't. So then it didn't matter that the fact they're now structured in a more what's the word, a way that fits with the RMA. You don't think it made any difference to whether they were truly.
That hasn't been raised. That hasn't come up so far. I mean, I know that in some areas, when I've talked to people, they said, "Oh no, we're not going to do a plan because we know it's not going to be used. We know it's just a waste of time." But for others, they see the value not just for council, but they actually see a huge value for themselves coming together, developing a plan that helps them sort of really focus what their priorities are and their actions. So they've found huge value in it for themselves.
Oh, cool, thanks. Yeah, well, maybe if I can email you, we could chat.
Yeah, feel free. That'd be great.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, well, I'll take this silence as you are thinking about all the wonderful things that Wendy and Lucy have been saying. Just thank everyone for your participation. Wendy's got her and Lucy's contact, or Wendy and Lucy have their contact details on the screen, but you can also connect them through QuakeCoRE many pathways. And we welcome Wendy to her leadership role within QuakeCoRE. We thank you all for coming on this, listening into the seminar, and encourage you to engage in the many ways within QuakeCoRE and continue really the research excellence. So QuakeCoRE is about research excellence, building capability, capacity, connecting our excellent research to policy and practice. So this really talk and this partnership and this work really illustrates all of those. So thank you, Wendy and Lucy, and thank you, audience. And we'll be in contact sometime, somewhere soon. Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, Wendy and Lucy, and thanks, DJ.